Howdy, I'm Cowboy with DIY Ready. This week we're going to build a remote control gun. Let me show you a little bit how this thing works. Move the controls around and you can see how the gun moves with it, as well as the video screen following the camera and the aim point scope. Let's take this thing outside, see how it really works. So let's just talk for a second about some reasons why we might want to have a remote control gun. Let's say you need to warn intruders away from your safe room or your panic room, or let's say for instance you just want to keep those pesky squirrels away from your garden. Now we're only attaching an airsoft gun to this, and that's all I'd recommend you do. If for any reason you're going to attach anything else to it, you should definitely check your state and local as well as federal codes and make sure that you're not breaking any laws. Now let me show you how this thing's built. So in this step, we're going to actually take our previously built motion base and we're going to take and mount our pistol to it so that we have control over it. Now in the step of doing this, we're going to have to take some certain measurements, and they're going to vary a little bit based off of what firearm or what airsoft gun that you use for this setup. So you definitely want to have a quad mount for your pistol to be able to make this whole thing work. And when I set it up on the existing base, I want to cheat it to the very back of the base with the grip of it, and I want to make sure that the top of the quad actually takes and rests on or slightly above the top edge of this. If it's not, then I need to go ahead and trim that back a little bit and get that to the right place. Then taking that, I want to take into consideration I'm going to need for this, I'm going to need some number 10 screws. I need a few at 1 1/4 inch because I'm using 1/2 inch ply for this. And then I'm going to need about 4 at 3/4 inch of number 10 screws. And then I'm going to use a number 1032 screw that's 1 1/4 inch long. I'm going to use that to attach to a sling mount for fitting onto a rifle base. So this sling mount is made for a quad rail on a rifle. I'll go ahead and take the sling mount portion out, and it happens on this one that it is a 1032. You want to check whichever one you get and make sure that's the case for this screw. I'm going to go ahead and just make sure my thread fits in there right. I'm good on that. Taking the measurement of my pistol, how high it is over the top, or how high this base is here. I add to that the width of the sling mount, which is an additional inch. So I've got 4 inches and 1 inch. So I'm going to make a board that's 5 inches tall, and I'm going to go ahead and match the base for this piece. I'm going to make it 6 inches long. So with that board in place, I'll take and go ahead, and I've pre-drilled my holes here. I'm going to go ahead and put my screw into the back of this piece so that I can take and mount my sling mount on there. I want to do this with the knob on the top so that I'm still going to have access to tighten and loosen it, place the firearm on and take it back off. I'll finger tighten it so I don't strip the threads. I can go ahead and take my screwdriver and snug this up. I also like to have a nut on the back side of the bolt just to act as a lock nut. Go ahead and make sure that I've got this nice and square to the surface of the wood. Adjust that slightly, and then go ahead and snug it the rest of the way up. And I'm just going to take and set this up here. I'm going to take a look again with the pistol on it. I can go ahead at this point and make a momentary attachment of the pistol to it. As you can see now, pistol is mounted to this board. Fits nicely on top of this on our motion base, but we also see that I've got some slack or some space in between here. I want to fill this in so that the pistol isn't moving around. And I'm going to need a place to mount the other mechanisms for the trigger pull and other items that'll actually fur out closer to the gun. So I'll take and measure that space. And in there, I've got about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to use another piece of 1/2 inch ply and take up most of that space. I'll take and cut a piece that'll fit in there for that. Now this piece is going to fit below the mount at the top. And I'm also going to make this piece longer than this board because I'm going to need a place to put my cable for my trigger actuation. This board's actually 9 inches long by 3 3/4 inches tall. So you'll see when I get it completed, it's actually going to fit on there like this. It'll actually screw to this board and fit on here like this. So I can take my unloaded pistol back off. Go ahead and mount this board to this one. I'm going to start with just a couple of my 3/4 inch screws at the bottom. I've pre-drilled all my holes once again just to make it easy to get the screws in and out. I'm going to use 2 of my longer screws to actually, my 1 1/4 screws, pre-drilled holes, to attach this to my motion base. Sure those are nice and snug. I'm going to go ahead and take and mount the pistol back on. And you can see that took up more of the space in between, still giving me a little bit of room for my mechanism, for my trigger. So the next step we're going to do is we'll actually take our pencil and we'll trace around the outline of the pistol into place. We want to transfer that onto the board. We want to be sure and trace around the trigger well and trace around the trigger with the trigger in the fully forward position. Also, using our unloaded firearm that's been recently checked, we want to take and pull the trigger to the full back and take and put a pencil line in for that as well. We're going to need this information in a little bit when we do our trigger firing mechanism. We're also going to look now at this board. We're going to see what we need to lock the base of the pistol in. Take a piece of plywood that's 9 inches long and the width of the remaining distance of this board here, which in this case is 2 3/4 of an inch wide. And then I'm going to take and match, mark, and notch out the rest of this board so that it will slide in around the base of the pistol and hold it firmly in place. I use a couple of my 3/4 inch number 10 screws. Just going to get them started here. With that in place, we've got something that's pretty firmly holding our firearm in the mount, and that also is relatively easy for us to remove and in place back on for unloading and reloading the firearm. If you want to get extra trick with this, you could actually cut out a little hole in the bottom of this to be able to extract your magazine and reload another one, but you want to be careful because you could actually lose some of the support if you don't do that carefully. So for this step, we're actually going to build the bolt actuation or the trigger pull actuation for our firearm. What we're going to need for this is we're going to need a surface mount bolt. We're going to need a metric 5 by 30 millimeter bolt. We're going to need a number 10 screw by 1 1/4 inch long. We're going to need a small and medium screw eyelet. We're going to need a small compression spring, and we're going to need our cable stop. And we're going to need a length of cable that matches the length of our control cables for our motion base. Previously, when we made the mounting for the pistol onto our mechanism, we took and traced around the outside of the pistol and included traced around the trigger itself. Now, having all that in line, we want to take and actually draw a line all the way across our board in a straight line in the direction of the trigger pull. This is going to give us the proper positioning for our mechanism. With that done, we're going to take and make the modifications to the surface bolt. Now, I've already drilled this out, and I'm going to have pictures for you to show you the mods to make on it. Actually, removing the bolt out, we've drilled the knob out and taken it off and made it so that we've got a thread for our 5 millimeter screw. Go ahead and take and put that screw in. We want to make sure that the screw is not sticking beyond the back of our bolt here. And we want to screw down the lock nut. We're then going to take our base plate for that, and we're going to screw it on and mount it to our board. Go ahead and slide the bolt in to the mounting base. And we want to have it so that it's centered right over the trigger where it will start or be fully open. And then we want to see how much room we've got on the back here. Then we want to take and pull it back and see how much space it's going to take to fully actuate the trigger. And we would do this making sure that our firearm once again is unloaded and with it mounted on the board. We'll figure out where the full pull of the trigger is, and we'll take and mark a line right there with our pencil as well. And we can take the firearm back off of the board. We'll take and mount our 2 screw eyes. We'll mount the smaller one in the front to be the stop for the cable housing. And the medium one in the back to hold the cable housing in place. We want to be sure and screw these down really close to the surface of the board. Point here is to keep this close for the mechanism so that the cable is not pulling outward on the mechanism but only straight back. With those in place, and the eyes being in straight along the line that we traced on the board, we can now look at bringing our cable into the scene. So for this, I'm going to take and feed the cable through the eyes. I'm taking, slide my mechanism out of the slot. Sure I got a little extra cable out. And take and push the cable through the hole that we drilled in the bolt. I'm going to apply one of the cable stops and snug it up, hand tight or finger tight. I want to make sure that the cable's got a slight bend in it so that I can slide it back through the base for the bolt and all the way back. Once I've got this done, I can take and tighten up our cable clamp. With that done, I'm going to take and drill a hole right at the front of my line here. I'm going to attach my number 10 by 1¼ inch screw through the board. Screw it about a 1/2 inch into the board. I'm going to take my compression spring, mount it over the top of my trigger bolt or trigger screw on one end and put the other end over the screw in the base right here. I slide my cable back into the sleeve, making sure it's all lined up. And then I can test and make sure that I've got the right pull on the spring in the cable. At this point, I can place my unloaded firearm back on the base. Making sure it's connected, and I can test and make sure that the trigger is going to fire correctly. And you can see that I wasn't quite in the base all the way, so I got to reconnect this. Go ahead and tighten the pistol down, and now I can check for the actuation of the trigger mechanism. It's kind of a hard pull by hand. It's where the bicycle grip's going to come into play. But I see that I've got the actuation of the pistol with my cable. Now I'm ready to move on to the other side of this, for this end of the cable. In this step, we're going to actually take and assemble the inside portion of your trigger mechanism, the part you're actually going to pull with your hand to actuate the trigger remotely. For this, we're going to need a mounting flange for a piece of 1/2 inch pipe. I used a piece that's 8 inches long to give me the length that I want off of my board here today. They didn't have a flange at the hardware store for a 1/2 inch, so I got a 3/4 inch, and then I got a bushing for it that goes from 3/4 inch to 1/2 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and screw the bushing into the base or the flange. Take the piece of pipe, screw that into it. I will then use some electrical tape and tape around it. And what I want to do is I want to find a spot that allows me to set the bicycle grip on and actually have just enough room to screw a pipe cap on top and to hold it down in place. The other items that I'm going to need here are going to be a barrel connector, which I pick up at an automotive store. These are used for carburetor cables and choke cables on some cars. And my bicycle hand grip for a brake, I'm going to make a modification to this. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to take and I'm going to break it open and hold it back. And just inside, I'm going to take and drill a hole straight through that comes out the top right here. What this is going to allow me to do is use a non-stock barrel connector to tie my cable to the whole setup. Let me show you how this works. I've got my cable that's coming off of the trigger mechanism here. I want to have at least a few inches left out from it. I can always cut off the excess a bit later. I'm going to take that cable and I'm going to run it through the bicycle hand grip, pull it through, and then I'm going to run it through the hole that I drilled inside, and you're going to see it coming out through the handle right here. You want to be careful with these cable ends because they can kind of poke you a little bit if you're not. We're going to close that off. We're going to pull all this tight. Then we're going to take our barrel connector. It's got a hole in the side on it, and we're going to slide the cable through the barrel connector. Pull it all taut against the handle. And then we're going to snug the screw up on it. Once we make sure that that's hand snugged and that our cable's nice and tight, and then we'll take a screwdriver, snug it up a little bit more, take and grab it with a pair of pliers, and then tighten our cable up good and tight. At this point, we can reconnect it on top of our pipe, screw our cap on, and make sure that the whole thing functions smoothly and that it actually goes back down when we release it. If we know we've got all that working, then we can take it over to our control board. I like to put mine right here in the middle of the control board, and I'll actually take and screw this down, and I'll have my completed trigger operating mechanism for the internal. When that's done, I'll have full actuation of the trigger. So now we've got our pipe screwed down to the board. We've got our bicycle grip attached to it. We've got a piece of tape underneath it to keep it up high, and we've got a cap on top to screw it down. We've got our cable coming up through the handle and our cable clamp on it. This is how the completed segment should look. You should feel a slight bit of a tension from the spring on the actual trigger mechanism, but it should pull it back or retract it when you release and let loose. So for the next step, we're actually going to take and assemble our scope and camera combination, and then we're going to attach it to the gun and to the TV. We're going to want to start with an aim point type scope that's got some sort of an open sight to the back. That way the camera can actually see through it. We're going to want a handheld video camera of your choosing. We're going to need to have a screw that will actually fit through our scope base and into the bottom of the camera. Most camera mounts have a 1/4 thread to them, and for this one we're going to use a 1" by 1/4 bolt. And then we're going to need a flat top scope mount for this. We want to have something that's got a fairly long rail so we've got enough room to mount our camera on as well as the scope. So to go ahead and do this, we're going to take the scope mount, flip it up on its side, put the camera on its side. We'll slide the screw through the hole in the base of the scope mount, line it up with the hole in the camera. We'll finger tighten this first just to make sure that we've caught the threads and we don't strip the threads in the camera. We can go ahead and start to snug this up now, just slightly at first. Then we want to make sure that we get the alignment of the camera pretty much straight with the scope base. Once we've got that where we want it, we'll go ahead and tighten the screw down just a little bit more, taking care not to strip it out. At this point, we can take and set it back down on the table, still making sure it's nice and square. And we can loosen our scope mount, slide it up onto the rail right in front of the camera, giving a little bit of space in between. We'll tighten up the mounting screw on that. We want to take now and make sure that the scope comes on, and then we've got a clear view through the camera itself. So I'll turn the camera on, take a look in my screen, and I can actually see the red dot on the endpoint scope, as well as seeing it on the screen and a clear view through all of them. If you find that you've got any issues with this, then you're going to take and make some adjustment to the spacing on them. At this point, I'll turn the camera back off for a minute. We'll take it over and attach it to the scope mount on top of the gun. Take and tighten up the mounting screws. We'll take the connection cord that came stock with the camera and an extension cable that's going to be long enough to get the camera out at the distance that you're going to want to have it. We'll connect that in the back side of the camera. Turn the camera on, and then turn on our TV and see what we got. And as you can see, we've got a clear view and picture, the same as what's on the scope of our pistol. And now you know how to build your own remote-controlled handgun. If you'd like to see more videos like this, things of that nature, go to DIYready.com. I'm Cowboy. Have a good day.